Good morning, everyone. First off, I'd like to take a minute to introduce myself. I'm Don Harberts. I'm the Vice President of Agronomy with Cooperative Farmers Elevator. We'd like to welcome you all to this morning's carbon market update on this beautiful Tuesday morning. Today we have two guest speakers with us. Mariah Murphy is the Truterra lead for Land O'Lakes, working in the Midwest, managing their Truterra program. We also have Jamie Ridgely, who is a carbon markets lead for Land O'Lakes, has been for the past 7 months. Is that correct, Jamie? Yes. So before we get started this, first off, there's a few things I'd like you to think about. Mariah is going to do a presentation here in just a minute and kind of go over some overviews as far as updates on the carbon market, but be thinking about questions that you may have. And so one thing I field a lot of what's going on in the carbon market and how is it going to affect me and how is it going to affect my operation. So today, really, we have 4 simple things that we'd like to cover. First off, we would like to continue to bring clarity about the carbon market, about the confusion that's going on, and also what there is for opportunity. We're going to attempt to answer as many questions as we possibly can get to today. We're going to make our members, owner members, aware of what may be coming down, and I think that's pretty important, Mariah, as far as what's going on in the future. And then lastly, inform our growers on how they can be more prepared for the next carbon market opportunity. And we launched one here probably about 3 months ago, and we had a fair amount of people that signed up, and some didn't get into the program. I think we had one get into that initial program, but so we just want to make sure you're as informed as you possibly can going forward through this opportunity. So Mariah, I'd like to turn this stage over to you if you want to jump on. I know you've got a few slides, and then we're going to go directly to the Q&A, and I've got a fair amount of those that we can just tee up for Jamie or for Mariah to answer. And so, and if you want to, you can type in your questions in the chat area here, and we'll be seeing those and we'll be fielding those. So Mariah, if you'd like to take over, you may go.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Don. So I just have very brief slides today, not very many, so we can really spend most of our time getting through the Q&A. But like Don said, we're really here to touch on just a few things. One of those is, what is going on in the carbon market today? What is maybe even some of those questions that you have that you are, you've always wanted to ask about the carbon market. And so we're just going to walk through some really basic stuff. So first and foremost, what is the greenhouse gas? And so you hear a lot of these terms being thrown around: greenhouse gas, carbon. Ultimately, the greenhouse gas is the gas that's released into the Earth's atmosphere, and it's trapping that heat, right? And so within the agricultural sector, there's really 3 major greenhouse gases. And the reason that I have this slide is because I want you to understand kind of what we are focused on through our program today. And so there's those 3 gases. You have the carbon dioxide, you have the methane, and then the nitrous oxide. And so what we are working with whenever we're doing our carbon market is the carbon dioxide. That methane typically comes from the cattle, and then the nitrous oxide is more of like the gas that's released from those fertilizers whenever you're working with your nitrogen source. And so as we talk about how does agriculture fit into the equation, we're going to let Jamie kind of do more of that high-level explanation of where that comes into and how that fits into what we are doing on a day-to-day basis. So Jamie, if you want to talk about that.
Sure. Thanks, Mariah. So to carbon sequestration, all that really means is that through the process of photosynthesis, we're taking these greenhouse gases that Mariah mentioned from the atmosphere. The plant is using the carbon dioxide. It's in the air, of course, through the process of photosynthesis, and then it is storing that carbon in the plant biomass, both the above ground biomass and the root biomass. And so as we talk about carbon dioxide removal and the promise or the opportunity for agriculture to start participating in this market and gain revenue for their carbon crop, what that really means is we're looking for practices that maximize the storage of carbon in biomass. And so that's really two practices that you can essentially get paid for today. And that is generally a move to no-till. So it doesn't have to be complete no-till or zero-till system, but significant reduction in your tillage practices, as well as addition of cover crop, or an extended. It doesn't necessarily have to be what we would typically call a cover crop, but an extended rotation. And so there are a number of practices that we'll talk about that reduce, like Mariah said, reduction of fertilizer practices and enhanced fertilizer management is also a great greenhouse gas reduction practice. But today, particularly through TruCarbon, but through many of the programs, the key opportunity that you have is really carbon sequestration or carbon dioxide removal. And that's all about how can we increase the storage of biomass in the crop. So we're really focusing on two practices here. It's a transition to a no-till or no-till-like practice, as well as the addition of cover crops.
Perfect. Thank you, Jamie. So as we talk about, how do we farm carbon, right? Every year you're gathering bushels of grain, and every year you come out with a new crop. And so you can really start to think of carbon in the very same manner. And so every single year you now have the ability to be able to sell those carbon credits that are generated within your soil. And so as we think about how do we actually, start transitioning into, I have carbon credits and then carbon credits as a commodity, I think this is a really nice way to be thinking about this, because every year you now have the ability to sell all of these carbon credits that are generated within your soil. And so as we talk about how is a farm generated carbon credit, how does that happen? What are the steps that you have to take? And so there's really 6 key steps, right? And so if the first piece is all about those practice changes that Jamie had mentioned. And so the farmer is going to implement one of those practices. So moving to a reduced till system, a no-till system, adding cover crops on their land, and then they get to that aggregation phase. And so this is really where Truterra falls in line, as well as CFE. And so together, the two of us will work with you to aggregate your data, to collect your field level data, and then to quantify the soil carbon that you have within your soil profile. And so that's where you would see us fall in line. Then you move to more of that verification phase. And so all carbon credits have to be verified. And within that verification phase, basically what they're doing is they're just coming to you and they're saying, hey, did you really do what you said you did? Making sure that everything is lining up the way that it's supposed to be. I always, just for transparency purposes, kind of like loosely use the term audit, because that's what it would seem like to a grower or a farmer, just making sure that you're doing what you said you were doing. And then that way they can say, yep, we 100% know that this carbon credit is what it says it is, and we can consider it verified. Then they move to the certification phase. And so once you're in that certified credit market, all credits have to be verified before they can be on a certified registry. And so there is a national registry that you can actually look up a credit that's available for purchase, which moves you into that level 5 spot where someone could come in and they could actually purchase that credit. So once it's on that certified registry, you could go in, you could purchase a credit that's been certified. And then lastly, you get into that maintenance phase. And so this is where the farmer is going to come in every single year for the length of that durability contract. And basically you're going to just say, yes, I continue to do no-till. Yes, I continue to add cover crops. And so you will do this for the length of that contract, which I think we'll get into later. But just keep in mind, those contracts can be anywhere from 10 to 20 years, possibly even more. And so what you will do is you will just work with your aggregator here on level 2, and you will just continue to update your practices, update all of your yield information and things like that for the length of that contract. And so there really is a lot of steps that goes into actually generating a carbon credit. I think that a lot of people don't really understand how complex it is, all of the necessary pieces. And then I would say that really, as you look at steps 3 through 5, those are really the most complex pieces, just because you are working with outside entities, you are working with people that are actually purchasing those credits. And so that's where it can be a little bit tricky to maneuver if you've never been part of a carbon credit market before. So as we take a look at just a couple important terms, there's two things that you hear us talk about a lot. Jamie's already mentioned a couple of them. So first you have additionality. So this is really just that proof that emissions improvement would not have otherwise occurred. So what that's breaking down and saying is basically you have made a change to like that no-till to adding those cover crops, and you are now, basically contributing to a carbon credit. So you're now sequestering carbon that you wouldn't have done previously. And so a lot of companies that we work with, a lot of companies that are on the market today, really focus on additionality. They want to be able to say that they're paying for some sort of change. And so for them, it is very important that the farmer makes some sort of additionality. And what that means for you is if you do not sign, a contract that is mutually beneficial for you and the company, then you may end up, locked into a contract that you have to start doing a practice that you've never done before and continue for the length of that contract. So really important that you know the terms of the contract whenever you sign it. And then lastly, we have like the permanence or the durability. I know that I've used that term. So what that means is how long is the contract going to be that you'll be signing? And so what the companies want to know is they want to make sure that that carbon credit is going to be permanent, right? And so keeping it in the soil for a period of time is really what they're focused on. And so they will pay you based on the permanence or the durability. And again, those contracts can be anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 years, just depending on what company you're working with and what their ultimate goal is. So really important. So as we take a look at just like our forward offering, Don had mentioned some of you have already been familiar with our carbon credit offerings. So we're currently kind of in this June space. We're working with our retailers, getting some feedback. September, we're getting our retailers like CFE, all built up, ready for the enrollment preparations that they can be expecting for our next offer. We will release our next offer, hopefully October timeframe. That's kind of our rough sketch at this point in time. So this offer will be released to CFE, and then CFE will be the ones that will be communicating that to you at that time. And then December, January timeframe, we will begin kind of that enrollment phase. And so you will work with CFE to get yourself enrolled if you have interest, work with them to have any questions that you have answered. And this will really be the time where you kind of ramp up your interest level or sign up into the TruCarbon for 2022. So as we talk about kind of this last slide before we get into questions, I always get a lot of questions on, well, what can farmers do today to prepare for tomorrow? I know we hear this all the time. I know we talk about this all the time, but it truly is all about data. And I say that because whenever you're looking at carbon markets, whenever you're looking at just even generally entering, you always have to have baseline data. And so if you have a carbon market opportunity that has a 2-year look back period, you're always going to have those 3 years of baseline data. So we're talking about 5 years of data. So starting with your data today, getting it into a place where you can house it, whether that be the Insights engine or somewhere else, working with CFE, getting your data in a place where it's stored all together. That is the most crucial thing for you at this point in time. Because this will allow you to create some baseline opportunities, which leads into number 2, right? So that way you can identify an area of improvement, maybe start working on some terms of additionality if that's something that you have to do. If you're a complete conventional till today, that will allow you to see an opportunity to start transitioning some of those acres into more of an accepted practice for the carbon market. And then lastly, you guys are already kind of in the right place because you're working with the Truterra retailer. You're working with that partner that's going to help educate and advocate for you. They're going to be able to bring you these opportunities because they work with companies like Truterra and others. And so we are constantly trying to evolve our carbon credit market opportunities, as well as our other ecosystem services that will be beneficial for you as a farmer. So with that, we will roll into more of the Q&A portion of this webinar. You guys can ask any questions to Dawn, Jamie, or myself, and we will begin with that.
Thanks, Mariah. I've got several questions here that were in the invite, and I'm sure this will spur on some questions, but I think the resounding question that I got through the invite is, what is the benefit to the growers and what is the risk to the grower by signing a contract with anybody? So I think some of it's pretty simple, but what is the benefit? What's the risk?
Sure.
And Jamie or Mariah can take that one.
Yeah, I'll take the benefit, and then Jamie can talk more on the risk side. So the benefit, I would say today, is that, depending on what contract you sign, you're getting paid for, in some cases, practices that you have already started doing. If you're working with our first contract that we had that 5-year look back period. Basically, you had already determined that was a good practice. And so now you're getting paid for something that you've already done, right? And I think the other thing is just that you're now able to take advantage of a market that is new to the agricultural sector. You're able to take advantage of some of those monies that are, allotted from these major corporations that want to invest in our agricultural market. I don't see that there's any risk in signing, especially if you're looking at a contract that has a 5-year look back period, because it's a very safe contract. Basically, you've already made that practice change, and now you can just get paid for something that you've already done.
Jamie, maybe this is a question for you. If not, you can pass it on to Mariah. Why can a long-term no-till grower not participate in the carbon market or the carbon sequestration market? And tagged onto that is, are CRP acres eligible? So you can break that into two if you'd like, Jamie.
Sure. So the question about why do these markets not allow in long-term no-tillers is a question that we get all the time. And it comes back to this concept of additionality that Mariah was describing. The foundation of the carbon credit market is that this investment is going to create new practice change that would not, or in this case, new carbon storage that would have not otherwise happened had it not been for the carbon marketplace or the offset investment. And so that's really key. It's not something that we like as agriculturists and as conservationists. But it is not going away. That is the foundation of the carbon credit market. There are a number of different initiatives. Certainly, these are things that Land O'Lakes and Truterra is advocating for, as well as looking for as many opportunities as possible. There are a number of things in play to try to figure out how can we also reward these long-term no-till growers for the practice change that they have made. And so I think you're going to see some of those things potentially through farm bill programs, or otherwise we're looking at other private sector opportunities as well. But it is highly unlikely, I think, that you'll see those growers being able to participate in the actual carbon credit market. Now, that being said, if you are a no-till grower and you are looking at maybe adding in cover crops or diversifying your cover crop or making any other change, that additional change does make you eligible and will result in you being able to get paid for the additional carbon storage that you have. So anytime you stack a practice on, you then become eligible. So just because you're a long-term no-tiller doesn't mean that you can't participate. You may be able to add another practice and participate and be rewarded really well. Because you already have been storing that additional carbon. So that's the answer to question one. That concept of additionality is really important, and it is the foundation of the carbon market. The second piece to that question about CRP, this is one that comes up a lot too. Certainly any grasslands, any permanent crop does sequester significant carbon. So it's a smart question, but today the practice standards that we're using, Mariah talked about this registration or certification piece, and so there are existing protocols that we have to use to transact and essentially create these credits. They do maintain that they are for croplands only, and so CRP would not qualify. There are also some grassland standards. We're not offering them through Truterra now, but that would be more of like a permanent conversion thing, so there might be some opportunities with with other types of permanent easement or semi-permanent easement programs there coming in the future. But today, this is really just all about cropland and transitioning working lands into production systems that sequester more carbon.
All right, thanks, Jamie. Mariah, I think this question probably best to go to you or both, either one of you. So at the last, on the last webinar, live webinar we talked about the TruCarbon program, the first offering from Land O'Lakes. How many growers at CFE were accepted into the first offering, and if more enrolled, why were they not accepted? Or I think the question is really as far as was there just not information enough generated, or why weren't more accepted into the first program?
Sure. So yeah, absolutely. So we have one grower from CFE that is signing the contract and going to that last phase. We had about 40, if I remember correctly, sign up through the initial portal that had identified CFE as their retailer. Once we got to that next phase of growers actually submitting boundaries, of growers actually pushing sort of that enroll button, what we found was we only had, I think, about 11 of those growers actually continue. I think 11 was the number, continue to that piece. So 11 of them enrolled. And basically why they were not accepted was because they did not meet the criteria. So we were having a 5-year look back. So what that means is that they have not made a practice change within the last 5 years. So that is really the key for this first offer. They had to have made a change to no-till, to strip-till, reduced-till, added cover crops within the last 5 years. And so they did not meet that criteria. But the one person that did, yeah, that they did make it through.
Okay. So a question came in right after that as far as the program, the Truterra program. How safe is my data in your program?
Yeah, so we take the data privacy very seriously. The data, of course, will always be yours. You will own your data with the exception of the data needed for the carbon credit purchase. You know, I would say that, you know, we have a very strict data privacy policy. We are not sharing your data with anyone outside of, you know, the organization. Your data is always your data, you know, and CFE can see your data if you opt into that piece. But we do take the data privacy piece very seriously, and you guys will always own your data.
Right. I think you made this pretty clear earlier, Mariah, but I think the importance for the growers that are on this call is that these offers that will come in Land O'Lakes Truterra is not the only company that offers them, but the more work you can do ahead of time, is that correct, Mariah? The more work you can do ahead of time to make sure that you're prepared when that next opportunity comes, that you can jump in and be ready for that. And so that's really what the importance of the data is. So, so Jamie, I'm gonna direct this question to you. Is that it's not necessarily a political question, so don't get nervous on me. But so as administrations come and go, 4 years, a lot of these programs are 20 to 100 year, 20 to 30 year commitments. I think the question really narrows down to, as we change administrations going forward, things happen. Will this focus on carbon markets be enhanced? Be depleted, go backwards? And I know that's a little bit more of your Washington correspondence, person that maybe could answer that, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, so most generally speaking, I'd say we absolutely do not see this being a fad, if you will, or specifically happening due to the current administration. We were seeing a number of signs of this before the change in administration, even during COVID, during economic downturn, all of the things that have happened over the last 18 months. We were seeing increased demand for ecosystem services, and we were seeing companies looking to invest in this. So, as you've all seen, every day, and not only are there new carbon market offerings that are being targeted towards growers, but there also are new commitments being made by all publicly traded companies, by each of the different agricultural commodity organizations are making, they're making net zero claims. And so the focus on greenhouse gas reduction and these goals is not going away. As you start reading about climate change and our programming to be able to meet those goals, we're sort of racing towards 2050. And so most of these commitments that have been made have a pretty significant commitment for the year 2030 as well as the year 2050. So I don't think we're seeing that going away. The other thing that we're seeing that I would say, sort of signifies that this is here to stay is we have a lot of investment groups that are making this a good greenhouse gas reduction plan part of the strategy that they're using to evaluate investments. So we're also seeing a lot of this coming into the financial markets. And just the question that often follows this as we get into this discussion is, how come this is all being targeted to agriculture? And I think that my encouragement there would be that there are all sorts of guidelines to how any company, a tech company, an energy company, et cetera, is doing their greenhouse gas accounting. They also have to make reductions. So they cannot just, the way the accounting is set up, you can't just what you would call offset your way out of this. So they can't push this all to agriculture. So I would encourage you to think about this as an opportunity. It's a way for you to leverage this outside investment to make some transitions on your farm that hopefully also result in additional productivity and resiliency on your own acres, right? You don't want to do this just for the carbon payment. That's a nice bonus. But yeah, we definitely think it's here to stay. Land O'Lakes as an enterprise is looking at that as well and really seeing this as where our future is going across all of agriculture.
Next question, we still have a few more questions, and as people ask more, be sure to type them into the Q&A area on our on your screen. So this one's probably directed towards me. What is the interest level with CFE growers? And probably how I would answer that is this way: is that there's a lot of interest from our growers as far as what the carbon markets offer for opportunity today. Equally asked question would be a lot of confusion in the market as far as, why should I sign this contract? Why should I sign this contract? I'm concerned about the 20-year or whatever, the length of contract. And so my ask of our growers would be to be as educated as you possibly can, know what you're signing before you could sign it, before you sign the documents. As far as CFE and our participation, we are strictly working, Mariah, maybe this isn't the way to say it, working as a liaison. We are trying to connect the right people to our customer growers and bring them the best opportunity that we possibly can. But there's a lot of interest from our growers at this point, just trying to get a better handle on what opportunity will be best for them. Another question, and Jamie and or Mariah, you may take this. As we see more interest in potentially escalated values in the carbon market, could we potentially see changes in land values? That's a $1 million question, right?
Yeah, so I think so. Sorry, I was replying. There was one question that we did miss at the beginning. So I think ultimately, as landlords and things like that start to have a better understanding of kind of what's going on within the carbon market and what's going on, within the ecosystem services, I do think that potentially this could, kind of affect your overall rent and things like that. I think you're going to start to see a lot more land manager companies get into things like this. Like Jamie said, there's a lot of interest, from a multitude of companies. And I think that land managers are really looking at, how can they play a part? Bankers are looking at how can they play a part. I mean, these are conversations that we have regularly. And so I would say that, maybe not next year, but I think in, the next 5 years for sure, this could definitely affect the price of those, those pieces of things, in particular your rent. The other thing is I think that, landowners will start to, kind of require that you are either participating in one of these programs or they will require that, you do some cost share with them as it relates to the carbon contracts. So I think that there's a lot of things that are coming down the pipeline. I absolutely agree with that statement. It's just a matter of when. But I think a lot of that will be pushed by, some of these land manager companies and such.
Yeah. The other thing I might add to that, Mariah, is so you pointed out that, likely this could have an impact on your rent. So for example, you sign up for a program, you're going to need to get essentially permission from your landowner that you can sign their acres up for this program. And at least for TruCarbon, this is different across the industry, but our contracts are with the grower or the operator, right, for the services in these practices. And so that potentially, that is a scary conversation because now they want more of the money, right? But the other thing, I think the flip side of that I might encourage you to think about is how can you use this as an opportunity to negotiate a longer term lease? You're making a longer term commitment to them. You're bringing some additional services that also benefit their land and greater soil quality so that, in the future, they have more of an asset. So I think it's also a great opportunity for you to start talking to your landowner about longer term lease agreements.
Mariah,
I just see you responded to one question. Do you want to take that one? You want to ask the question and go for it?
Yeah. So Jamie, in that very first question, what are the risks? If you want to just touch on that.
Sure. So, I mean, the first one, of course, is how long, what's the term, how long? And then how does that impact either your lease agreement or if you are planning to transition out of farming within that time period? There's just lots of questions around that. And so I think that's the first one, is the risk to what if you want to do something different with your operation in the future. And, we, again, this is specific to TruCarbon, but we are really looking for ways to make that these grower agreements as sort of grower centric as possible and give you the flexibility that you need to operate. And so we're trying hard to figure out how can we develop contracts that manage risk as a project owner, which there is significant risk to, transacting, aggregating and transacting these projects. So how do we manage that and be able to create a contract that's really grower centric? So we're not putting a grower in a position to do anything that isn't ultimately what's best for their operation. And so, that's a work in progress. We're working on those things. But I think that's the first one, right? Is the term, and is it a commitment that you're willing to make? And if you need to change, and most of these contracts will allow you, of course, to change or step out of them, but then what is the impact for you, right? What's the retribution if you do that? You need to definitely understand that if you need to change practices, if you need to till, whether it be because you tiled and you want to knock down the ridges in your field, or if it is because you had to, there was a certain weather event that you needed to till, like what's going to happen if you have to do that. And, at least in our contracts, we definitely, provide for that and to provide for that flexibility, but you want to understand that. And then I think the other thing really is the transition risk. So a lot of these programs are asking you to sign up and then start planting no-till and cover crops. And it might be a shorter term, but you're making the commitment to transition at the time that you're transitioning. And so I think making sure that you have a really good support system, agronomic support system, and a good understanding of what it takes to farm in that new system is something that I know we're working really hard to be able to build and offer through our retail network within Truterra. But I think that's really important to think about as a grower. You don't want to do this just for the carbon payment. So we want to make sure that as you transition to these programs, that process has good outcomes for you from a yield and productivity standpoint. And then that long term, it's a good change for you overall. So I think that's the other piece of risk for you to manage. And we talked about the landowner considerations. That's always a concern as well if you're leasing a good portion of your land.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jamie. Don, do you have other questions?
I don't have any that popped up on the screen. I'm looking through my list that was emailed in. So Mariah, maybe you can touch just a little bit. I think I got 4 or 5 questions I came through this as far as soil type. As far as the potential for certain soils to sequester more carbon through crop and so forth? Is there a correlation to that as far as heavy, dark, black soils versus light soils? Is there any correlation to that whatsoever?
Yeah, there is. So I'm going to touch on it just briefly, and then I'll let Jamie, because she's really the expert here. So there is a correlation just around specific soils. I'm not going to say by soil type, but more around regions. So as we think about more of like the Midwestern soils, those are typically better at sequestering carbon than, let's just say, those in Western Kansas. So we really are sitting in kind of the perfect spot to be able to maximize our payout on the carbon payments. A lot of it is, just like everything else within, the ag sector, it's environmental. It's all about the water, how arid is the climate that you live in, how much precipitation are you getting. And so all of those things do factor into the amount of carbon that you can sequester. Jamie, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think you covered it pretty well, Mariah. It's typically your higher organic matter soils, because organic matter and carbon content are certainly correlated. So your higher organic matter soils are typically going to be those with the most carbon storage potential. One thing I might want to add to what Mariah was saying, so we anticipate, at least the best that we can model and measure these things, is that most soils probably can continue to sequester more and more carbon year over year for somewhere between a 20 and 30 year period. So the idea would be, if you're going to transition to these crops, that this additional storage, so you're getting paid every year for additional storage, your carbon crop, as you will, it would be, about 20 to 30 years that you could continue to get paid. And some of that is based on research at this point, because we don't have a lot of great long-term longitudinal studies, but we think that that's probably the length of time that you could continue to get paid for additional storage year over year.
There's a question that came in: if I start a cover crop practice next year, how long will it be before I can start receiving carbon payments, assuming that this person qualifies?
Yeah, I can take that, Don. I was just going to type an answer. So that really depends on the program. So some of these programs will pay you, you might be signing a 10-year contract, and they might pay you 5 years payment upfront. So you're signing away your carbon rights for 10 years. They'll pay you upfront for a large portion of that. Some of them will pay 1 year at a time. Some of them will amortize a 1 year payment over multiple years. So there's a lot of different ways that payments are structured. So it's really hard to answer your question, Kevin. We are working on, say that you were to enroll in TruCarbon, we're looking at what that will look like for us next year, and I can't tell you 100% for sure, but we are hoping that we will have sort of a shorter term contract, maybe a 2 or 3 year, that would get you more money up front. But again, all of that is to be determined. But going back to that risk question, this is another place you want to make sure you really understand what are you giving up in terms of rights. So we're structuring our programs today so that you're just getting paid for carbon storage for a specific year, and all you're required to do for that durability term is just report to us. You can market those credits elsewhere. Some programs are not structured like that. They're buying your right to that carbon asset for multiple years, maybe 10 years, maybe 5 years. It just depends on the program. So you really want to understand that, and then that will directly tie to when are you getting paid and how much are you getting paid.
All right. So I think we'll just use this as a last question and a closing question, and all three of us can answer this. But really the question: what can I do now, today, to prepare when, not if, it's when the next opportunity comes to sign up for a carbon program? So Mariah, you want to start, and Jamie, you want to jump in, and then I'll close this webinar. So.
Yeah, totally. So, I think that we've hit on it a few times, but I think the most important thing today is, if you have an interest, explore your options, right? I think look at all the contracts out there. There's a lot of them. Ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I would say that that's kind of the most important thing, is make sure that you're asking the questions that you have. Make sure that you're working with a source that you can absolutely trust. And lastly, we hit on it, but it truly is about data, and it's about having your data in one place It's about working with sort of a data management provider that can store the data for you and can let you know when an opportunity arises for you to be able to qualify for an ecosystem market.
Jamie, anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I support everything Mariah said. The other thing I said, and I'm saying this because these are conversations my husband and I are having about our own farm, but is like start thinking about what changes on your farm would you be willing to make? What do you think is realistic? And where can you go for support for those? So because ultimately this is really about continuing to be productive, right? At least in the near term, your ability to maximize production on your acreage year over year is still the biggest revenue opportunity you have. So if you can convert to one of these systems and be at least as productive, and I'll tell you that soil health data shows that you will be, right? But it's a new kind of farming in some cases, and so you need to make sure you have the right support mechanisms in place. So start thinking about equipment changes. How would you plan for these things? How would you really maximize this opportunity on your farm? And Insights Engine and help that you can get through CFE can help you start to look at where on your farm might you start to make these changes. And so you want us to be having those sort of planning conversations as well, because this will require you to make a practice change and maintain that. So you want to be successful in that transition.
All right. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Mariah. I guess the only thing I would add to that is, in the time I've been involved in these programs, it's all about data collection, and being ready. We have about 40,000 acres in our Truterra program, and throughout the territory, those growers are probably the most prepared when the day comes to sign up to know what's going on. So committing data, committing to collecting data, while it seems daunting, is not such a daunting task. And I would recommend that if your acres are not in the Truterra program, which Jamie and Mariah are heavily involved in, as well as myself, contact me, and we can get your acres enrolled. It's not a painful program or process whatsoever. The second thing, and I think it's been spoken pretty clearly, is know the options, know what's going on, be educated, listen, get on a lot of webinars and do a lot of reading on it, because there's a lot of, I'm not going to say loopholes, but there's a lot of different things to look at as far as these contracts go. But with that, Mariah or Jamie, anything else in closing? Otherwise, we can let these people get back to work on a beautiful Tuesday morning.
No, I don't think so. Thank you guys so much for the opportunity and spending, I guess, like 45 minutes with us. We appreciate it.
Our commitment at CFE is we're going to continue to bring you more information as these programs come out. These live webinars, we can go 150 miles east to west in our territory and inform a lot of people, and so we'll continue to use those. But as always, don't be afraid to reach out to your location agronomist, feed person, a grain person, manager, myself directly, and we can get you as many answers as we possibly can. So with that, thanks, and you guys have a great week.
Thank you.